justice. Here's what they said earlier in the week. Killing Palestinians. Nearly 24,000 have been killed since the war began and 8,000 are missing, causing serious bodily and mental harm. Here they say nearly 60,000 Palestinians have been injured and more than 1,000 children have lost limbs. Mass expulsions from homes and displacement. Here, 85% of Gaza's population has been forcibly displaced. Deprivation of food and water. Israel called for a complete siege of Gaza, blocking electricity, food, water and fuel. Deprivation of shelter, clothes, hygiene and sanitation. Here, many Palestinians are left exposed to the elements without access to clean water or toilets. Deprivation of medical assistance. Israel has carried out more than 230 attacks against Gaza's health facilities. Destruction of Palestinian life. The case cites the obliteration of entire neighbourhoods, housing infrastructure, schools, religious sites and cultural institutions, and imposing measures intended to prevent birth. The case calls out unsafe birthing conditions and an increase in premature births. William Schabas is a professor of international law at Middlesex University and the former chairperson of the Commission of Inquiry on the 2014 Gaza conflict. He's also the author of Genocide in International Law, The Crime of Crimes. He joins us now from London. Good to have you with us on the programme. Can I just begin with it? There's been time really to digest the ICJ hearing and the presentations from both South Africa and Israel. And most analysts suggest that the South African case is strong. If it is, hypothetically, when a court announces provisional measures, what can we expect to see as the content of those provisional measures? Is it one size fits all, or is it a case of sort of picking and choosing of what the judges think is legal and correct?
Yes, it's the case of picking and choosing. South Africa has a long wish list, really, of what they would like the orders to contain. But I think it's probably unlikely they're going to get everything on the list. The court is also entitled to improvise and make its own suggestions. So it could run the gamut from the most, I think the most severe order, which would be to stop all military activity in the Gaza Strip. But the court has done this before. It did it with Russia in Ukraine 2 years ago. And, people will argue that, Israel still needs to fight there in the territory, but Israel's shown itself to be incapable of distinguishing between civilians and combatants. So really, that would be a very good, valid order, but it would be expecting a lot for the court to issue that. It could be a much more modest type of request, but significant, such as to allow unhindered access to food, medicine, potable water, electricity, and so on into Gaza. It could also involve orders about controlling the hate speech that has been emanating from Israeli personalities, political leaders, ministers, and so on. Or it could be something more in the symbolic nature, like an order to Israel not to commit genocide. This is what the court ordered in the Gambia-Myanmar case a few years ago. And when an order like that goes out, although the state will answer, and Israel will no doubt answer, that's not a problem for us because we're not committing genocide, it does have a strong symbolic value. And when that order was given against Myanmar, around the world, it was taken as a message to Myanmar to behave itself. So even that type of symbolic order is not without significance.
I mean, there is a much more complicated scenario, isn't there, really? Because the Israeli Prime Minister, for example, has already said that he's going to ignore any edict that may go against Israel. I mean, but this actually ICJ result would go to the Security Council, and there sit the US, Israel's allies, as well as the UK and France. What scenarios are we looking at here in terms of enforcement of an ICJ ruling? You talk about sort of the psychological effect of any ruling and the impact it has on sovereign states that are members of the United Nations. But it's all about enforcement, and that's what the public at large, who are demonstrating out on the streets at the moment globally, want to see.
Sure. Well, obviously the enforcement, the ideal would be for the Security Council to take appropriate action, but that's also a very difficult environment, essentially because of the triple veto of Britain, France, and the United States, who are going to stand in the way of the most robust measures to tame Israel's conduct. At the same time, a judgment or an order from the court, the defiance of Israel. So I saw the prime minister also basically being entirely dismissive of the court, but that's not going to sit well with many of the countries in Europe, Canada, Australia, traditional allies of Israel. I agreed they don't have the same impact that the permanent members of the Security Council do, but nevertheless, they're going to be very uncomfortable with this dismissal of the role of the International Court of Justice, because they are very respectful of the court. They're not going to like it.
Professor, briefly, if the court does see in favour of Israel, they can carry on with their war on Gaza and it's business as usual then, is it?
Well, yes, absolutely. If the case I mean, the case cannot be dismissed at this point, but what can be dismissed is the request of an order for provisional measures. I think that's highly unlikely, and my own view is that this would do more harm to the court than anyone else, because the court has already ruled on provisional measures in many other cases that are not nearly as dire as the one in Gaza right now. You know, you mentioned at the outset that this is the 100th day since the conflict began. When we compare the 23,000 deaths with the number of deaths, for example, in Ukraine after 100 days, which was in the range of 5,000. And of course, that's a country that's 20 times the size of Gaza. And the International Court of Justice was anxious to intervene and make orders then. So this will destroy the credibility of the International Court of Justice if they don't actually rise to the occasion.
We'll leave it there for now and see what happens. For the moment, William Schabas, thanks so much for joining us from London. Now, demonstrations have been held in several cities around the world in solidarity